Well, during this Christmas season, the reflection might well come, how can we relate it, compare it to what Zen has to teach us? And once again, I think we can find an penetration, illumination of the traditions, help us to go more to the root of each one. In our Christian belief and practice, we tend to emphasize the absolute unique quality about this baby in Bethlehem. This particular child is the Son of God, and absolutely unique event in human history. And in a sense, of course, that's correct. I mean, we certainly believe that this is the firstborn of many brethren. This is the Son of God, the one from the very first moment of incarnation was the face of God in the world. But I think the whole dynamic of it is to show us that there is no separation, between God and humanity, between creation and the Creator, between, in Zen terms, absolute and relative, that they are always completely one. And this is true from the very beginning of time, not just in this child. This is where it's concretized, where it's most evident perhaps, most challenging. But it is what's true, as Richard Rohr likes to say, what's true somewhere is true anywhere. What's true in this moment is true always. And that's actually in conformity with what the scriptures say. When we realize that the gospel on Christmas morning, for example, is the prologue of St. John. All things were created through the Word. The Word was with God from all eternity, and all things were created for Him. He was in the world already, the gospel says. The light in Him was the light, life. In Him was life, and the life is the light of men, of humanity. So this was already operative. And St. Paul, when he speaks about all things were created through Him and for Him, and in Him all things hold together. That there's the cosmic mystery there from the very beginning. He fills the universe and holds parts, the risen Christ as well. So this is this leads us to an awareness, basically what Jesus said Himself. Whatever you do to anyone, you do to Christ. Because each child, each person is the Christ child, is that reality. Pope John Paul himself in his first encyclical said that when the Son of God became man, He joined Himself to every man of all time, every human of all time. And Jesus Himself said, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. So it's actually a very Christian insight to realize that the absolute is present in anyone, anytime, any child, the most marginalized, the hungry, the thirsty, the immigrant, etc., in the most intense, real way. And of course, that's exactly what Zen reminds us of. That wherever you go, in every person, in every event, in everything, in a flower, a tree, a speck of dust, the absolute is present. You encounter the absolute right there. It is the Buddha. It is, we would say, it is the Christ. So we see the deep truth of each one. There's actually a piece in the Times on Christmas Eve called "Humanizing Jesus" by Peter Wehner, who is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And this is very much along the lines of what he points out, that God came to earth, not in a raging whirlwind or in a devouring fire, but in humility, without power or wealth. So, in the poorest, most vulnerable, most unexpected, in the poor, the hungry, the thirsty, the immigrant, the naked, the prisoner, the sick. That's where, in the most poor, empty place is where we would expect, where we do find it. His life is a profoundly human one, deep implications for how Christians should live their lives. He says, for one thing, the incarnation dignifies the everyday. You couldn't get more Zen than that. Wash your bowl. This ordinary human circumstances in each moment is where you find God, where you find the absolute. The incarnation also bestowed worth on people considered contemptible, unessential, and valueless. The least of these, as he says, and as I just quoted from that parable. So, in the most marginalized, the poorest, is hidden, an eternal mystery. So there's an emptiness, to use the Zen word. Emptiness, in Buddhism means, yes, it means that reality, absolute reality is empty in the sense that you can't categorize it. There's no way you can conceptualize it. It's empty of all categorization. You can't grasp it in that way. But it's empty in this deeper existential sense as well that Christianity is pointing out to us. It empties itself, to use a phrase from Philippians. It's poor and empty in that sense. It is vulnerable, and that's vulnerable and poor and simple. The absolute reality is that too. And we've never really grasped that in Christianity. We say that this man on the cross, we say that this babe in the manger is the revelation of God, but we've never really taken that seriously, that powerlessness, that poverty, that emptiness, that vulnerability, what that reveals about God. We say it is the face of God, but we don't really believe it. We immediately turn and go back and say, well, that's just for a little while. Then he's going to come on the cloud with majesty and, cast thunderbolts and cast, well, no. What we learned is what the Eastern tradition has always called non-violence, ahimsa, non-harming. That there's a vulnerability, a non-violence, to absolute reality, to our deepest reality. I've been thinking that, and this is something I think Richard Rohr's pointed out too. When we say God is almighty, or the absolute is almighty, we're setting ourselves up for an illusion because we immediately project what power is. Oh, our human power. It means we can impose our will and do what we want and tell other people what. Well, apparently not. That's not what's revealed anyway. Either when you sit on your cushion, or when you go to church and see the stable, or see the cross. It's much more accurate for our human understanding to say, all vulnerable God, the all vulnerable one. That's what we see there. Because if we say, the absolute is almighty, God is almighty, well then, if he's almighty, why does he allow this and this and this and this and this? Whoa, if he's almighty, why does he allow all this? Well, because that's not the kind of power that God has. That's not what power means. Power means being vulnerable and emptying yourself, pouring yourself out, and being poor. In other words, love. That's what love is. Which doesn't impose itself or get its own way or be violent or, micromanage. It's a giving, self-emptying, pouring out. It's a vulnerability. It's a wonderful French Jesuit, Francois Varillon, who wrote about the suffering of God and the humility of God, very much along these lines. He says there's a childlike quality about it. So it's really almost a childlike suffering, which is exactly what we see in the stable and even on the cross. But this is the character of reality that we see then also in Buddhism, this kind of pure emptiness, this pure vulnerability, this poor. Well, compassion. Call it compassion. Ultimate reality is compassion. Ultimate reality is love in any tradition, and that's the flavor of it. I like to express it this way even. That the nothingness, that emptiness, is the source of is love in action. That's what. So you can say kind of lured out of emptiness by love. The incarnation is what we are. That and lured back into emptiness by love. That's what the Trinity is in Christianity. It's coming forth from emptiness and going back into emptiness by this continual outpouring of love and poverty and vulnerability. And that's the paragon, the exemplar of reality. And it's a beautiful way of saying it in terms of love. So even we are called out of love, out of the nothingness into creation by love. We're lured into being by love, and then we go back in love as well. He has some, in the article he refers to this quality, speaking of friendship in particular, that Jesus in his humanity was open to friendship. He called us friends. We no longer call you servants, but friends. So that he entered into, real relationship with people, and he makes a big point of that here. So there was no divine distance from life, its experiences, including its grief and hardship. He just shared in that, loving participation in precisely the suffering of life, the suffering of God. He mentions the raising of Lazarus. God bestows mercy amid our struggles and repairs the broken areas of our lives. And so he says, ultimately, the Christmas story and the story of grace and redemption is a story of love. When the divine became human, I didn't enter Jesus' world, he entered mine. So that pouring out and sharing in the relative by the absolute in a way that reveals exactly what the absolute truly is. But we've turned it into, a power thing on the part of God, rather than really learning a lesson of how that's revealed, what Christ reveals about the absolute. So this compassion that we're talking about is really what you call a bodhisattva, and all of us are called to have that emptiness, the vulnerability, the pouring out, the compassion in the world. Which is the ultimate reality, present here in our relative reality. And who exemplifies that? You might call him a Yuletide bodhisattva. Santa Claus. Santa Claus is a bodhisattva. I mean, originally was a bishop, as you know, Saint Nick, who gave gifts, in secret, pouring himself out. But I think it's a wonderful image, and I always said so back. I've said this for decades. People complain, Santa Claus and secularization of Christmas. But for little kids, I don't think there's any better image for God the Father, for ultimate reality. We talk about the man with the white beard, but this is a good version of it. Where someone who is all benevolent, coming in secret, excitedly, pouring out his gifts. For a little kid, I think that's a great image for reality, ultimate reality, bodhisattva. So the same Christmas Eve in the Daily News, as you may have seen, there was a reprinting of the Virginia letter. Yes, Virginia, there's a Santa Claus. You've all heard of that, I'm sure. It was published in 1897 in the New York Sun. It was a response to a letter by an 8-year-old Virginia O'Hanlon, who lived at 115 West 95th Street. I have to go check that out. Is it still there? And what is it? But she says, some of my little friends say there's no Santa Claus. Papa says, if you see it in the Sun, the newspaper, it's so. We're all saying that today. Well, I saw it written down, so it must be true. Anyway, so please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? So on the basis of what I've just said, you can understand maybe where the reply is coming from. The editorial writer Francis Pharcellus Church is the one who wrote it. And he's a Zen teacher. I never read the whole thing through. I don't think I ever remember reading the whole reply. But I was saying, this guy is teaching at a Zendo. Listen to this. Your friends are wrong. They've been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. So whether you're sitting on the cushion or praying in a pew, you're trying to get beyond simply what you see. All right? They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. Yeah, well, that's a temptation for modern humanity, isn't it? If I don't understand it with my mind, it's not true. And we've tried to reduce the mystery to a formula. And of course, Zen explodes all that and says there's no concept which is adequate to that. So listen to what he says. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. Little. You can do nothing with your little mind. As soon as you try to grasp it, you're either ridiculously arrogant or comically, faulty. It's just not going to work. But our little minds, it's not the Buddha mind, it's not Christ consciousness. So in this great universe, he says of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in his intellect. As compared with the boundless world, the vast boundlessness, that's what Zendo always talks about. The infinity of God, if you will. The infinity of everything, the universe. As measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist. The Bodhisattva. Love and compassion. And you know that they, those qualities, abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Its ultimate reality, in other words. Whatever we mean by the absolute, by God, that's what God is. God is love. And that's what our reality is. We're a reflection of that. We are it, as Ten would say, as a Christian mystic would say too. How dreary the world would be if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. So the world would be very dreary without each and every one of you as Christ, as the Buddha. You know. It would be very dreary without each one of you. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We would have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world, poor vulnerability, would be extinguished. So he goes on in that vein. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are unseen and unseeable in the world. Unless you sit long enough on your cushion, or pray long enough, then you can begin to catch it. If you're vulnerable and poor and empty enough, like God, like the Absolute. So there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived could tear apart. It's not a matter of strength in human terms. It's a matter of weakness. When I am weak, then I am strong. Someone said that, right? So only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance, love. I'm sitting on your cushion. He didn't say that, but I am. Can push aside the curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world there is nothing else real and abiding. Sounds like Yasutani Roshi. No Santa Claus, thank God he lives. And he lives forever. Huh? This is an absolute reality. Huh? Immortal and infinite. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times, 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of the child. And he will continue to make glad our hearts if we have the heart of the child. Simple and open and undefended. Full of love and wonder. So, any comments on that? Personal reflection.